Hey everyone, tonight we're going to take a step into the world of medieval royalty, into a ritual that's far from glamorous. You'll be watching a medieval princess prepare a bath. It sounds like it would be a relaxing and elegant process, right? Well, think again. In reality, it's a long, somewhat uncomfortable and extremely meticulous process. Picture this: a room full of people, an array of oils, perfumes, and hot water being carefully transported. But instead of a simple moment of pleasure, what happens here is an endless sequence of tasks, adjustments, and preparations. You're probably wondering, why is this so complicated? Let's try to find out the answer as we take a look at the incredibly boring bath of a medieval princess. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to know. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background noise, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself entering a large chamber, thick with the scent of herbs and faint traces of incense. You feel the cool stone floor beneath your feet as you watch the scene unfold before you. You are no longer in the 21st century, and the concept of a quick shower simply does not exist. The environment is meticulously prepared, almost like an elaborate stage for a performance that you will watch in silence. The first thing that catches your eye is the water. Unlike the easy access to hot showers we have today, bathing the princess requires considerable effort just to adjust the water temperature. It's not a simple process. Attendants come and go carrying heavy jugs of hot water, heated on large stoves or fountains. This detail is crucial. They can't get the heat level wrong. After all, if the water is too hot, it could make the princess uncomfortable. If it's too cold, the entire ritual could be compromised. We can already see that this bath is not just a moment of relaxation, but a major operation. You watch, trying to understand how it all works. As the attendants prepare the water, you notice that there is a kind of choreography. Each person has a specific role, from the one who heats the water to the one who lights the room with candles, creating an atmosphere of privacy that, despite all their efforts, is never truly achieved. Historically, the concept of privacy in medieval bathing is well non-existent. Servants, helpers, and even other members of the court may be nearby, always monitoring every step of the way. If you somehow thought that a medieval princess's bath would be a serene and private affair, think again. The amount of work involved in this event may seem overwhelming for something that should be a simple moment of hygiene. But here we are, witnessing a spectacle of preparation and detail that defies any idea of simplicity. By now, the princess is standing patiently while the water is being adjusted. Her helpers are, in fact, competing with each other to see who can bring the water the hottest, but not so hot that it burns. The tension is almost palpable. As the process progresses, you realize that in the end, all this effort is to ensure that the princess has what is considered a perfect bath, an event that does not happen easily. As the sound of water being poured into the jars echoes through the room, you can almost feel the lightness of the moment. If it weren't for how long the process seems to take, the princess must have nerves of steel, thinking about the endless hours she'll spend in this process. You wonder if perhaps she's already gotten used to it, or if she, like us, would get bored with the repetition of all these rituals. And as the water is finally poured out, you feel the mood of the room change. It's not exactly the kind of relaxing bath you might have imagined. In fact, what's happening here is more of a series of small tasks performed until the princess finally feels ready to get in the water. Now, with the water finally set and ready, you watch curiously as the head attendant begins to prepare the princess for the bath. Unlike how we imagine it today, where we simply step into the hot water, the medieval process of bathing is more like a series of carefully orchestrated steps. You might think that the princess's clothes were already heavy enough to make her uncomfortable, but they need to be removed with a level of precision and respect that is almost ritualistic. Each piece is carefully removed one by one, and everything must be done with exacting delicacy. This is a princess, after all, and any mistake could be seen as a huge lack of respect. Meanwhile, you notice how slowly things happen. The ladies in waiting. don't just take off her clothes. They do it with a strategic calm, almost as if it were a work of art. The act of removing layers of clothing becomes a performance, more about maintaining the princess's status than anything related to comfort. It's a perfect example of how the simplest details of medieval life were carried out with a seriousness that might seem excessive today. You're starting to get the idea. This bath isn't just about hygiene, it's about status and ritual. The princess needs to demonstrate that she's being treated in a manner befitting her status. As the attendants remove her clothes, you notice that every move is followed by the watchful eyes of other members of the court, who are probably watching, waiting for some kind of mistake or slip-up. The privacy we enjoy today in a simple bath is non-existent. In fact, the idea of privacy was almost unheard of in many aspects of medieval life, especially for high-status figures like a princess. And that's where the fun of the process begins to reveal itself. It's not a fun of joy, but of bewilderment. You find yourself asking, does it really have to be so complicated? Perhaps the answer has to do with the symbolism. The princess's bath is not just about cleanliness, it's an assertion of her position, her wealth, and her power. Every movement, every task, and even the water being prepared are all part of a spectacle of class and sophistication. The truth is that, as tedious as it may seem, it's a much more complex process than any of us could ever imagine. Now, as you watch, the princess finally steps into the water, and this is where things get even stranger, and at the same time more curious. Unlike a simple, relaxing bath where you sink into the water and let it wash over you, she steps in with a certain amount of hesitation. The water is, in fact, warm enough to make her skin tingle, but you notice a slight tension in her body, as if she's not entirely comfortable with the situation. Of course, she's being watched by several people, which must add a certain amount of discomfort. But this discomfort is part of what makes the medieval princess's bath so unique. You wonder why she couldn't just get into the water herself, without all the pomp and circumstance. But the truth is that in the Middle Ages, even the most private moment of a high-class person's life was permeated by observances and rituals. As much as it may seem like a tedious torture to someone who's just trying to relax, this process was part of everyday life for royalty. As the princess slowly eases herself into the warm water, the amount of scented oil being poured around her is almost overwhelming. The water, which was supposed to be a means of purification, now seems more like a scene of lust than anything else. It's not that she's actually relaxing. Rather, you sense that she's being swept up in a kind of slow, almost meditative movement, but it's not really restful. You start to think about how different medieval bathing was to what we have today. Back then, there were no modern sewage systems or the ease of heating water that we do now. People had to heat the water manually, often using fires or large cauldrons, which made any kind of bathing a time-consuming and difficult affair to perform. This makes the princess's bath all the more impressive in terms of effort and complexity, and as you watch this process, you can't help but wonder, why all the trouble? Why not just get in the water and relax? Perhaps the answer has something to do with the fact that in the Middle Ages, every act, no matter how simple, was a reflection of social standing and authority. A princess's bath wasn't just a matter of physical cleanliness, it was an assertion of her status. And like everything in medieval life, even the most mundane things were charged with meaning and elaborated down to the smallest detail. Now that the princess is finally in the water, you may begin to notice something very interesting about her surroundings. Unlike modern baths, which are designed to be quick and efficient, medieval bathing was a much longer and more laborious experience. As the princess relaxes in the warm water, you realize that the presence of several attendants and servants is still essential. They are not just there to make sure the princess is comfortable. In fact, they are there to perform a variety of tasks that seem completely unnecessary to those accustomed to modern times. First, the ladies-in-waiting begin applying oils and perfumes, but in a completely different way than we would today. There are no bottles of lotion or perfume sprays on hand. No, here, they use a thick type of oil made from herbs, flowers, and sometimes even milk. This oil is not only a cosmetic, but also a way to protect the princess's skin, and according to medieval belief, keep her muscles and organs healthy. It's a mix of superstition and beauty care that certainly seems quite peculiar to us today. As the ladies in waiting do this, you notice how much attention has gone into every detail. It's not just a matter of rubbing oil on your skin and being done, no. Every movement is carefully planned, almost like a slow, calculated dance. The princess relaxes, but you can still see the slight tension in her expression. She has to stand up straight, not because someone told her to, but because as a royal figure she can't show any sign of weakness or discomfort. And it doesn't matter how slow and tedious the process is, she must maintain her composure, no matter how tired she is. This kind of ceremony may seem absurd, but that's how things were. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was about being seen in a certain way. A medieval princess's bath was a display of power, wealth, and status. And while it may seem incredibly boring to us now, you realize that for people back then, it was part of building an image. When you have as much power as a princess, every public act is a chance to reinforce your position, and bathing was no exception. The water is getting cold, and you can see the small movements of the attendants going back and forth to heat the water again. In a modern bath, this would be done in minutes, but here, the water is constantly heated in cauldrons and brought in jugs. It seems like a never-ending task, and indeed it is. This makes bathing an experience that lasts not minutes, but hours. And as the princess moves back and forth, the attendants keep applying more oils, perfumes, and even in some cases, polishing her skin with soft cloths. You're probably starting to see the pattern. Medieval bathing, and particularly the princess's bath, was more about the people around you than the actual cleansing. A big part of the ceremony involved showing off your royalty, your wealth, and, to some extent, the patience of everyone around you. It wasn't just about feeling clean, it was about maintaining a public image that reflected power, control, and, of course, luxury. But as all this happens, you wonder if the princess actually gets any enjoyment out of this process. She's being treated with the utmost care and delicacy, but the amount of work that goes into making sure every detail is perfect is enough to make anyone lose their patience. Is she somehow starting to feel how tedious it all is, just like you? Or has she, like so many other high-status figures, been conditioned to see all this as part of her role and never questioned the exhaustion it brings? As the process continues, the conversations begin to fade away, and you feel the atmosphere becoming heavier, quieter. With each passing minute, the princess becomes more relaxed. Although the bath is still far from a quick or simple affair, it makes you think about the idea of status in medieval times. Everything from a simple bath to the most elaborate banquet was an opportunity to show how powerful and sophisticated you were. Just when you think the bath is almost over, another attendant brings another layer of oil, this time scented with a rare flower that only grows in a distant region. The scent is sweet and light, but also quite intense. This final touch of oil is what seals the experience, not only for the princess, but for everyone around her, who can now say that they have witnessed a royal ritual. This is no mere hygiene. It is an assertion of her status, a display for everyone around her. And you well now understand that this bath, as boring as it may be, is actually a spectacle of class and pomp. As the princess's bath continues, you begin to realize that despite all the care and attention to detail, what unfolds before you is not just a cleansing experience, but also a visual display of power and authority. The princess is not there to feel relaxed or comfortable. She is there to fulfill a role. Her every move, every glance from a servant, every delicate gesture, all serve to reinforce her position in the social hierarchy. Time, in this environment, seems to be distorted. The process is not just a matter of getting in the water and getting out quickly. No, it is more of a meticulous ritualization, and every aspect seems to have a purpose. The ladies in waiting are not just there to help. They are helping to create the impression that the princess is an untouchable figure. Bathing, in fact, is a status experience, a symbol of power that, at its core, has nothing to do with cleanliness itself, but with how others perceive it as a. The bath continues, you begin to wonder, where does real relaxation happen? For the princess, it all seems more about fulfilling a set of social expectations than experiencing something truly invigorating. Deep down, you know that what she wants more than anything is to escape the constant gaze of the servants and allow herself to feel human. But that's not possible. It's not something she's allowed to do. The feeling of being watched at all times becomes a constant throughout this process, and you feel strangely connected to her as it happens. The water is now slightly cooler, which means the warming ritual is about to begin again. Servants enter the chamber and begin bringing in the jugs of hot water, their weight evident as they slowly walk around the space. They cannot make mistakes. They cannot do anything that would upset the meticulous balance of the process. Every mistake would reflect not only on the princess, but on the service provided. This creates a tension that hangs in the air, a subtle reminder that life in the medieval court was full of unspoken rules, and every small gesture could mean a great deal. Luxury, contrary to what many imagine, does not come from relaxing freedom. It comes from controlled effort, a series of rituals of high expectation. As you watch the princess being slowly caressed by the cool water that now reaches her shoulders, you notice how she begins to relax, albeit subtly. The warmth of the water, combined with the scented oils, begins to envelop her body in a way that brings some relief after this painfully long process. But you wonder if, in some way, she really feels this relief, or if she is just fulfilling what is expected of a person, of her position. The tension somehow never completely dissolves. The conversation between the attendants is also not as light as it could be. The exchanges are quick, discreet, almost as if everyone is afraid to make a noise, as if silence is a part of the ritual that must be kept intact. But even so, you notice the discomfort that must be building up for the princess sooner or later. The pain of having to maintain perfect posture, while the whole process proceeds at an excruciating pace, is not something that can be ignored. However, what you do realize is that for her, this has become a part of the cycle of her life. As with so many things, the suffering in the medieval bath is part of a larger system that is difficult to escape. Part of this is the ritualization of what would otherwise be a simple act of hygiene. For medieval nobles, bathing was not a moment of pleasure or relaxation, but an experience of reaffirming their status. They could not in any way show that the process bothered them. They needed to be above it, demonstrating that they were, on a higher level, immune to the discomfort that others faced in their own simple baths. The water, now cold, begins to demand more heat. You feel immersed in this endless cycle of heating, cooling, and heating again. What for us might be a simple dip in the water and a quick exit becomes an event that takes hours, and you are beginning to understand that this is exactly what defines the medieval experience: the time, the effort, the suffering. All of this serves as a way of marking the princess's position in the world. Every detail is designed to display a form of dominance, and you realize that the true strength of her royalty comes not from the lack of hardship, but from her ability to endure it with grace. With each new pitcher of hot water that is brought in, you feel the weight of the story. It's not just about the princess now, it's about the social system that keeps this ritual going. This bath is much more than a simple act of cleansing. It's an elaborate performance, a play for the royals and servants to watch. And you, as a viewer, begin to wonder, how far will this go? When finally does it all become too much? Too much. The bath proceeds with a disturbing, almost hypnotic calm. The ritual, which already seems endless, seems to stretch even longer, as if time were distorted by all the pomp that accompanies it. You observe the princess partially submerged, with her gaze focused on what is in front of her, trying to maintain serenity in the face of the uncomfortable situation. Each moment seems to be a conscious effort to preserve her image of perfection, and no matter how tiring or repetitive the process is, she cannot show any signs of fatigue or irritation. You begin to realize that the servants and ladies-in-waiting, however attentive they may be, have the almost impossible task of remaining completely silent. This is not only out of respect for the princess, but also out of a genuine need to not disrupt the natural flow of this ritual. They know that every act, every look, must be done with the utmost consideration. It seems a little absurd when you think about it, how a simple hygiene task can turn into something so complicated and full of rules. But in the Middle Ages, everything had a purpose. The princess's bath is an opportunity for everyone present to reaffirm their place in the social hierarchy. But as you lose yourself in thoughts about the social complexities of the time, the scene begins to take on a more surreal quality. A fire burns softly in the corners of the room, creating an atmosphere that is both cozy and unsettling. The heat is oppressive, but sweat does not drip, at least not on the princess, for she is constantly being cleaned and polished by her ladies-in-waiting. Every movement is meticulous, and the polishing process is not just a matter of stretching her skin, but of massaging and smoothing her muscles as if she were being prepared for some performance. And deep down, you start to wonder, what is the real purpose of all this overexertion? In a deeper sense, the princess's bath, while tedious to the observer, is a reflection of the feudal system. She is not just a woman seeking cleanliness, she is a living representation of her lineage and power. The bath is not just physical, it is also symbolic. Every layer of oil, every temperature of the water, every movement of a servant around her has meaning. The scent of flowers and herbs, which may seem like mere aesthetic whimsy to us, is actually meant to reinforce the idea that the princess is a figure who stands above nature, almost untouched by it. The servants begin to move more quickly now. They know that the end of the bath is approaching, but curiously, what comes next is not what you might expect. Instead of a simple final drying step, the princess is wrapped in soft towels, but also in rich fabrics that are carefully and meticulously passed over her body. This is not just about drying her skin. It is about maintaining the appearance of someone who has never been truly exposed to the vulnerability of everyday life. All of this serves to cement her image, to ensure that she is seen as a figure who not only reigns supreme but also remains pure and untouched by the simple realities of the outside world. The drying and dressing process is not done in a hurry. The pace remains steady but incredibly slow. The warm air in the room, still filled with the scent of herbs and oils, seems to enter a rhythm of its own, where you feel time dragging on, almost like waiting for the bath to be finished. The attendants now begin to apply fine touches of fragrance, as if the princess needed more layers of perfumes to further separate her from common humanity. As the ritual draws to a close, you realize how royalty, even in their most mundane practices, is immersed in a constant cycle of display and control. There is no room for genuine relaxation or unwinding. Medieval bathing for them was not about simply getting rid of dirt. It was about ensuring that their presence, their authority, was immortalized in the memory of all who witnessed their untouchable figure. No matter how slow or repetitive the process, the ultimate goal was not cleanliness, it was spectacle. Now that the princess is finally dressed and her bathing ceremony is over, you get the feeling that for her the real work begins. The layers of rich clothing are carefully put on. The accessories that indicate her status are adjusted, and she returns to her place of honor, where all eyes are on her, watching her every move. The process of becoming royal again, of re-entering the world of court and society begins. But oddly enough, what you feel at this moment is not relief. Instead, you feel a slight melancholy, a sense that true rest, the kind we all seek at, the end of the day is completely out of reach for figures like the princess. The bath, as tedious and exhausting as it was not for her a respite from the world, but a reaffirmation of her presence in it. The irony of it all, she had never had the luxury of genuine rest. Now that the bath is over, you begin to notice an interesting contrast. The princess, who seemed so immersed in a world of opulence and ritual, is now once again a cog in a larger system, where rest and pleasure are almost unimaginable. She stands, all her attire meticulously placed, like a porcelain statue that can never be stripped of its public role. What you have just witnessed was no simple act of hygiene. It was an elaborate preparation for her return to the stage of royal life. As she begins to be led back to her chamber, you feel the tension in the air. The entire process has been a long-running performance, with every detail planned not for comfort, but to maintain her immaculate image. And as she goes, you find yourself pondering something deeper. Could this excess of formality and structure not serve to erase her, to distance her even further from the common people? In a world where every act is observed and scrutinized, Even bathing becomes a political act. What the princess now experiences, after this long ritual of cleansing and presentation, is a return to what we might call medieval reality. She cannot simply relax, take time for herself, as any of us would do after a long day. Her life is steeped in rules and expectations that force her to be a public figure at all times. With every step she takes toward her throne, with every adjustment of her luxurious clothes, you feel the weight of her burden. Luxury, while seemingly desirable, in fact keeps her trapped in a gilded cage of expectations. And as you journey alongside her, you realize that the women of the court, who were apparently there to serve her, also play a role in the social theater. They are not just there to help with bathing or applying perfume. They are there to ensure that the princess never loses her position. They have to be present, to observe, and to behave impeccably, as if every look and every gesture were equally important to the performance of this ritual. It is not just the princess who is being molded. It is the entire court that is forced to participate, to live within this rigid and carefully orchestrated reality. As the princess approaches her chamber, you begin to realize how painfully repetitive this experience was. Every day she went through this same process: the bath, the preparations, the return to her role. Every movement seemed preordained, as if her life were a grand stage on which she was merely an actress who could never stop performing. The clothes, the perfumes, the oils, all of this is just part of the ritual to maintain the illusion of royalty. But at some point, what is being preserved is not just her image, it is the very class system that keeps her there. The irony of all this is that for most medieval nobles, these practices were seen as an obligation, a tradition that could not be questioned. The idea that something as simple as bathing could be turned into a display of power and status was a reality for them. To us, it seems like a complete exaggeration, a waste of time. But to the medieval princess, this was the life she knew, a life where every act had a greater purpose, where nothing happened without careful planning. You find yourself immersed in these thoughts, but at the same time, you feel a certain disconnect from what is happening around you. Medieval life, with all its complex rituals, seems so far removed from what we consider normal. Perhaps that is the beauty of the process, or perhaps it is precisely what makes all this effort even more boring: the constant repetition, the lack of space for rest or genuine pleasure. The princess may have been in her moment of greatness, but deep down she was never truly free. And you begin to understand that for her, life was a performance that allowed no rest. As she finally reaches her chambers, the rhythm of medieval life returns to its former self. The scent of perfumes, the slight tension in the garments, the care with each movement. Nothing has changed. The princess is now ready to go about her day, but you wonder if she feels any relief after all this. What you have just witnessed was undoubtedly a display of wealth, status, and power. But deep down, you know it was also a display of how medieval royalty was trapped not only by their responsibilities, but also by their social expectations. The princess now stands in her chamber, seated on an ornate chair, her heavy robes draped tightly around her body. You notice that the space she is in, like her own body, is surrounded by an overwhelming opulence, but at the same time, without any real sense of comfort. The room is filled with a mixture of slowly burning candles and the sweet scent of dried flowers that seem to have been chosen to please the senses, but not to offer any real pleasure. Every item in the room, from the tapestries on the walls to the intricately carved furniture, is designed to remind everyone present of the princess's position of power. The contrast is clear. The wealth and comfort you see around her are not for her, but for everyone else who enters this space. Contrary to what you might expect, the princess does not flop down on her bed, nor does she even seem to breathe a sigh of relief after hours of intensive care. There is no time for that kind of relaxation. Those rich, carefully made robes she wears are not just status symbols. They are heavy, hot, and require constant care. Every movement she makes, even in the confines of her room, is being monitored, in some way by a set of invisible rules. You realize that in the medieval court, the concept of comfort is completely different from what you might imagine. The princess does not have the privilege of hiding under a soft blanket and relaxing. Every piece of clothing, every adornment, carries with it an obligation, a responsibility to maintain her image intact. Every moment she spends in her room is an opportunity to be observed, to be admired, or perhaps even criticized by other members of the court. The tension between what she wants and what is required of her seems to be ever present. The servants who had accompanied her during her bath now enter her chamber, bringing more accessories and adjusting the details of her appearance. There is not a single moment of pause. The work of maintaining the princess in her exalted position is never done. They bring new perfumes, subtle touches of cosmetics to enhance her beauty, and even more layers of fabric to ensure that she always lives up to the standard that royalty demands. But the curious thing is that, as this happens, you realize that the princess has no room to be herself. She cannot simply relax or lose herself in quiet thoughts. There is no time for that. At some point she looks out the window of her room, and you who are there by her side as a silent observer feel a slight sadness. The horizon outside seems to be a representation of what she cannot achieve: freedom, rest, ordinary life. Although she lives surrounded by luxury, what she really has is a gilded prison, where the constant pressure to maintain her position never ceases. And you begin to wonder, could she, for a brief moment, dream of the simplicity of life outside the castle, of the small pleasures that ordinary people have throughout the day? Or perhaps has she lost this desire long ago? The princess, now more relaxed, finally lies down on the bed. But you notice that, contrary to what you expected, she does not simply relax. Her eyes are fixed on the ceiling, and you feel that, even in her rest, she cannot escape the thoughts that surround her. The daily ritual, the looks of each servant, the expectations of the court. All of this weighs on her. And you, who are watching, begin to wonder, what is the true price of royalty? The luxury, the wealth, the honor. Is all of this worth the lack of personal freedom, the constant surveillance, and the impossibility of living a quiet life? The princess then closes her eyes, and for a brief moment you feel that she is finally allowing herself some rest. But you soon realize that this rest is fleeting, for the sound of curtains being drawn and the footsteps of servants still echo through the castle, reminding her that in the next moment, real life will resume. Even in the silence of the night, the weight of obligations and expectations never completely disappears, and as the castle falls silent, you stand there, reflecting on the paradox of real life and the solitary existence of a medieval princess. She lives in a world of grandeur, but what you have just witnessed is not a fairy tale. It is a story of exhaustion, of invisible wear and tear, and of how what seems to be the idealized life of a monarch can, in reality, be a prison disguised as luxury. With all these thoughts running through your mind, what remains is a deep sense of discomfort, not because of the scene you just experienced, but because of the weight you know the princess carries on her shoulders, and as you slowly walk away from the room, you feel that the true luxury she would desire, more than any jewel or expensive garment, would be the simple freedom to disconnect, even if for a brief moment, from all the apparatus that surrounds. Her night falls over the castle with the softness of a heavy cloak. Yet even as darkness descends on the surrounding space, the atmosphere within the princess's chambers remains tense. The sounds of the castle, though more muted now, are still present. The soft rustle of robes being adjusted, the flickering of candles in the background, the soft sigh of wind coming through the cracks in the walls. Yet the princess remains still, her eyes closed, and you sense for the first time an atmosphere of tranquility that has not been forced or generated by endless rituals. But what should be a moment of rest for her ends up being an even more solitary and unsettling experience. In the distance, you hear the sound of laughter and conversation, probably from the other members of the court who are still socializing in the great halls. However, it doesn't affect her directly, not because she can't hear it, but because she's in a completely separate universe. The social interactions that unfold far from her chamber are like a parallel reality that never reaches her. And as you lose yourself in your own thoughts, you wonder if she will ever feel part of this, or if her life will forever be cloistered within an endless ritual. The princess breathes deeply, as if trying to leave the weight of the day behind. But you realize that it is not simple fatigue that consumes her. It is a feeling of detachment, of disconnection, that seems to weigh more heavily than any physical fatigue. And you know deep down that she can never afford to fall into a deep, restful sleep. There is no room for that kind of vulnerability. Her royal persona is built on the idea that she must always be alert, always present. No matter how much she longs to surrender to the feeling of rest, she is constantly immersed in a state of vigilance. As she lies in bed, you realize how the true complexity of the role of a medieval princess goes beyond simple hygiene rituals or luxurious clothing. Every detail of her life is a complex construction of image and power. There is something deeply ironic about this, as you realize that everything she owns, from the most precious fabrics to the elaborate baths, is actually a reflection of how far removed she is from ordinary life. For her, the simple act of resting, of disconnecting from the world around her, becomes impossible. She is trapped in a cycle of demands that cannot be broken. You wonder if, at some point, the princess dreams of a different life. Maybe she wishes for something as simple as an ordinary day, where there are no judgmental glances and no rituals to follow. But try as you might to imagine such a wish, it seems impossible. She has been molded from an early age to be a public figure, a representation of power and authority. Her rest is not a priority, and her free time, if you can call it free time, is limited to moments like this, when she allows herself for a brief moment to close her eyes, but never allows herself to fully relax. And it is this disconnect that you begin to feel most acutely. No matter how much she tries to indulge in rest, expectations are always lurking, waiting to be met. This is the burden of medieval royalty. There is no room for spontaneous moments of pleasure or genuine rest. When she tries to allow herself a moment of tranquility, there is always a servant, a responsibility, an expectation hovering around her. Every aspect of her life is driven by an invisible and constant force that never allows her to be completely free. You look around the princess's chamber and for the first time see everything in a new light. The luxury and wealth are merely camouflage for the invisible prison she lives in. Every item that surrounds her, from the rich tapestries to the ornate furniture, serves to reinforce her position. But somewhere deep down you know that these objects are not for her pleasure. They are to ensure that she never loses her image of sovereignty. The castle, with its grandeur, is not a refuge, it is a stage, and the princess, unfortunately, cannot help but be the protagonist of this story. You feel a slight compassion for the princess, not for the wealth she flaunts, but for the freedom she never had. You realize that while she tries to rest, the weight of obligations and responsibilities prevents her from truly letting go. She is trapped in a cycle that, although seemingly glorious, actually keeps her from what every human being deep down desires, the freedom to simply be, without having to play a role, and so you find yourself reflecting on what is truly valuable. As the world around you continues to turn, with its court and its customs, you sense that the true greatness of the princess lies not in her clothing or the luxury that surrounds her, but in her ability to bear it all, with grace and endurance, even if deep down she never has the chance to live for herself. Time passes strangely inside the castle. Minutes, hours, and days blend together, almost becoming a single, never-ending entity. For the princess, the concept of time is different from what you know. While you lose yourself in the calm of the night, she is immersed in an endless cycle of expectations and duties. Rest, which for many would be a blessing, is no longer a luxury for her. It is just another obligation that needs to be fulfilled, like all the others in her royal life. As the night progresses, you notice that no matter how hard she tries, the princess can never fully escape the rigidity of her world. The movement of the curtains, the rustling of the leaves outside, even the distant sound of the festivities still continuing in the great halls of the castle, all of it blends with the sound of your breathing, which seems like a constant reminder that your life will never be yours. She lives for the gaze of others, for the constant expectation of always being ready, always perfect, and always up to the role she has been assigned. The surroundings are silent, but the pressure seems increasingly palpable. No matter how hard, she tries to free herself from the pressure she cannot. The castle walls, with their grandeur and imposing nature, are both a refuge and a prison. Though they are filled with luxurious tapestries and ornate furniture, the space offers no true relief. The luxury is merely a facade, a curtain that hides the invisible chains that bind her. The silence in the princess's room is interrupted by a faint sound. You turn and realize that the servant who has entered the room is not part of your usual routine of rest. This older servant seems to be there to bring you something more than just adjusting the curtains or the candles. He brings a message, perhaps an order, perhaps a reminder. It doesn't matter what it is, because for the princess the message is clear. She is never alone, even when she is. The idea of privacy, of having a moment to herself, is something that has been lost somewhere in the past. You watch as the servant approaches the princess and, without saying a word, hands her an object. She receives it with a neutral expression, as if she is already accustomed to this routine, to the act of receiving something without question. The object, a small parchment, is immediately read by her. You do not know its contents, but you can see in her eyes that the concern is inevitable. In your position, every movement, every word spoken, every action taken is an extension of your role as a leader, as a public figure. Your personal life, your desires and needs, are mere details that are hidden behind the veil of royalty. The princess, now once again interrupted, looks down at the parchment, and somehow you know that this moment is not just a break for her. For her, it is yet another reminder that there is no time for true rest. What could have been a moment to shut off from the world is immediately filled with a responsibility. As always, she needs to focus, not on herself, but on the role that is thrust upon her. As you watch, the servant withdraws and the castle returns to its silence. But the atmosphere is not the same. There is a deeper weight in the air now. Even in her moments of rest, the princess is aware of her position, and that knowledge never leaves her. She may try to close her eyes and surrender to the stillness of the night, but the weight of her duties remains. And as the night deepens, you realize that the cycle will repeat itself. Rest will never truly be rest for her. The pressure of her public image, the glare of the court, the responsibility of her position, all of it will continue night after night. Even as the world around her falls asleep, the princess remains alert. And this, you realize, is the burden of being a figure of power. There is no room for vulnerability. There is no time for complete rest. The castle, for all its grandeur, remains a stage, and the princess, its star, is always in motion, never able to slow down completely. Her position, although it places her above everyone else, also keeps her at the mercy of a constant expectation, a vigilance that never lifts. When others rest, she remains vigilant, in a perpetual state of alert. The freedom she might feel, the simple happiness of being herself, is left behind. And so you, who watch in silence, begin to understand something profound about the weight of royalty. Even when you are surrounded by luxury and wealth, there is no true freedom. There is no freedom to be vulnerable, to relax, to lose yourself in a moment of respite. For the princess, luxury is her own prison. And you wonder, will she ever find the peace she seems to crave? Or will she forever be destined to live in the shadows of her own greatness? The castle remains silent, almost as if time were suspended, waiting for the moment when the princess finally allows herself the rest that has been denied her for so long. But you know that this will never happen. Not while she continues to carry the weight of being a public figure, of being constantly watched and even more so demanded. Deep down you begin to realize that her life, although covered in luxury, is marked by a profound lack of freedom. As the castle sinks deeper into the night, you sense a tension in the air. There is no longer laughter in the banquet halls or soft chuckles on the stairs. Everyone seems to have retired to their chambers, and the court is now dispersed. Yet for the princess, nighttime does not represent a respite from the world. No matter how late it gets, no matter how many hours pass, there is always something, someone, an expectation in her path. Rest is no longer a moment of relief, but an inevitable part of her routine, a part she must fill as best she can, ever vigilant. She leans back against the feather pillows, her eyes closed, and you can almost feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Even with the softness of the bed and the comforting dim light, she is not truly at peace. Her mind continues to race, every thought focused on the duties and obligations that stretch out before her like an endless river. She must already be, thinking about what the morning will bring, more ceremonies, more visits, more appointments with her court. There is no room for herself, for the simple pleasure of letting her thoughts settle. Though you can see how hard she tries, the princess's reality is one of constant vigilance over her image and reputation. Every breath she takes is intertwined with the image she must project. She is a reflection of power, of nobility, of a world that is always in motion around her, demanding her attention. No matter how much fatigue consumes her, she cannot give in to rest as an ordinary person would. There is always a watchful eye, always a role to play. Sleep, which would be a welcome relief to anyone else, seems to her a distant luxury. When rest is finally achieved, it is fraught with a sense of discomfort, not just physical but psychological. You can sense this clearly. With every slight movement, the gesture of adjusting herself, the princess is reminding herself that rest is not something that can be genuinely enjoyed. Her position of authority demands that, even in the stillness of the night, she remain alert and vigilant. With every step she takes inside her own room, the sense of freedom continues to fade. Even in the private space of her chamber, the princess cannot escape her role. The luxurious carpets covering the floor, the velvet curtains, the finely carved furniture, all seem to shout the same message. She is always on display. No matter how comfortable the surroundings, the princess knows that she is under constant surveillance. No matter how far she tries to distance herself from her role, the responsibility of being a symbol never leaves her. The perception of power, the eternal pressure to maintain her image, the impossibility of failure. These are the burdens she must carry day after day, night after night. You begin to reflect on the solidity of this royal life, where, instead of having the luxury of rest, she is consumed by the obligation to remain perfect. Her own image and her duties bind her in a way that you can hardly comprehend. It is not only her body that is in constant motion, but her mind, which can never stop planning, anticipating, preparing for what is to come. Every act of rest, every moment in which she tries to shut herself off from the world, is a reminder that true freedom was never part of her destiny. And as you watch the princess lie there under the thin covers, her eyes closed, you can't help but feel a little sad for her. Her life is an eternal search for something she can never attain, the tranquility of personal freedom. The luxury that surrounds her is a smokescreen that covers the fact that she has no right to be vulnerable. Even in the quiet of her bed, she is enveloped in a whirlwind of obligations, pressures, and expectations that never leave her alone. You wonder if she will ever be able to escape all this. Will she ever be able to rest completely without the weight of her position weighing her down? The answer, you know, will probably never come. The princess, in her greatness, is imprisoned by the very image she must maintain. And as she tries to surrender to rest, to peace, to a sense of ease, she realizes once again that true freedom has been a distant dream. The castle, with all its luxury and splendor, is just a reflection of what it could have been if circumstances had been different. Instead, she is a figure, a shadow of the very woman she could have been. What about rest? Well, rest is just a concept she will never fully understand. The night slowly advances in the castle, as if time itself had been entangled in the heavy tapestries that decorate the long corridors. You still observe, in silence, the room where the princess rests. She has turned once more, adjusting her posture in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, as if the simple movement of changing the way she lies could bring some sense of relief. But no matter how hard she tries, peace continues to escape, like water slipping through her fingers. The pressure on her shoulders, this invisible responsibility, never leaves her. You realize that, as much as she is surrounded by wealth, true luxury has never been hers. Luxury, what really mattered, was the freedom to be a normal person, living a simple life without the constant surveillance of an entire court. Her every move is closely monitored, not only by her servants but by everyone who depends on royalty. Every decision she makes reverberates throughout the land. She's more of an idea than a person, and that makes her even more distant than you might imagine. You wonder what it would be like if, for a moment, the princess could cast aside the masks of royalty and simply be human. Perhaps she dreams of a life where she could walk the streets unrecognized, where her actions didn't carry such weight, where she could just be someone, not a figure destined for greatness. But those dreams, you know, will probably never come true. Her position is her prison. The distant sounds of celebration still reach your room. Perhaps it is an echo of the celebrations that continue throughout the castle. The music, which sounds vibrant and full of life, is like an irony. Outside, life goes on. The servants dance and laugh, but inside the princess's room, everything is quiet, heavy and lonely. You think that maybe she, from inside, can even hear the party going on in the distance, but she is not allowed to participate. This is not your place. You take a deep breath, trying to connect with your surroundings. The soft scent of lavender that fills the room is comforting, but it is not enough to dispel the pressure that hangs over the princess. Even the perfume, so calming, seems insufficient to alleviate the weight she carries. She tries to close her eyes once more, but sleep, always elusive, never truly arrives. Her mind continues to spin, overwhelmed, full of questions and responsibilities that cannot be ignored. And then suddenly, you notice a subtle but revealing detail. The princess is, in a deep sense, tired of being this image, tired of being this symbol. But she knows that she cannot simply give up. Somewhere deep down, the princess must long for the freedom to be herself, to live a simple life. But no matter how much she fights against it, there is no longer any room for the desire, for genuine rest. Her life is meant to be a performance, a public display, and every movement, every gesture must be flawless. There are no mistakes, no flaws allowed. Her life is a constant production, a play that can never be stopped, never turned off. But even though all of this is a reality, a prison without bars, you still feel sad for her. The luxury around her, the velvet curtains, the fine wood furniture, all of this is just adornment, a stage that hides the emptiness she feels. Things may shine, they may be beautiful to look at, but what lies behind all of this is a life that is not completely hers. Her identity has been molded, transformed into something that must please and be acceptable to others, and this will never leave her alone. The castle, however imposing and majestic, is no home to her. It is a prison disguised as beauty. She walks its ornate halls, but there is no corner where she can truly retreat, where she can rest without fear of being judged or observed. Even in the comfort of her bed, surrounded by all the wonders that power can bring, she finds no relief. You begin to realize, perhaps for the first time, the true nature of your prison. As she tries to rest, you feel a deep silence settle over. The chamber, the softness of the covers, the scent of lavender, the sound of the wind in the windows, all of these elements contribute to a sense of calm, but you know that for the princess, none of these will be enough to bring rest. She will always be at the mercy of the gaze of others, of the need to always live up to her position, of the obligation to maintain her image. And deep down you realize that rest for her will never be complete rest. Every time she tries to relax, the pressure brings her back to reality. And when sleep finally comes, it is with a weight of guilt, of unfulfilled duties, of a life that cannot be lived fully. Ultimately, luxury and power are not enough to give her the freedom she so desperately needs. And as the castle rests in silence, you sense that the princess, even in her most intimate moments, will never be able to find true peace. The night continues its course, slow and heavy, as if time itself were dragging itself through the immensity of the castle. Silence seems to be the princess's only companion, but not a silence that brings rest. Instead, it envelops her, pressing against her back, making her feel even more isolated. You realize that, unlike anyone else, the princess cannot take refuge in the stillness of the night. The calm is only superficial, a mask for the constant turmoil that accompanies her. In her room, she tries once more to close her eyes, but there is always something that prevents her. The soft sound of sheets of paper being turned, the distant whisper of servants exchanging low words in the hallway, all of this prevents her from finding the genuine sleep she so desires. Exhaustion seems to be taking over her, but her mind never stops. There is always something else to be done, something she must plan, something that must be decided. The weight of leadership, the demand to be perfect, the constant effort to maintain her impeccable image. All of this mixes into an overwhelming feeling that prevents her from relaxing. You, who are silently observing, know that the princess, even in her most private moments, does not have the freedom to be vulnerable. Throughout her life, she has learned to hide behind the mask of perfection, strength, and grace. But you also realize that even when she tries to rest, that mask never completely falls. She still feels watched, still feels as if she is being judged, even in the place that should be the safest for her. The luxury of the room, the richness of the bed she lies in, cannot soothe the pain she carries inside. They may be soft to the touch, but they do not offer the peace she truly needs. And as the princess tries to settle down once more, you see a slight frustration on her face. She doesn't want to be seen like this, doesn't want her vulnerability exposed, even though you are in a way there to witness it. You feel almost guilty for being a silent witness to her struggle. But at the same time, there is little you can do but watch as she squirms, as she tries to escape this cycle that imprisons her. The luxury that surrounds her is not enough to ease the pressure of her position. The expectations are much heavier than any soft fabric or ornate furniture. No matter how hard you try, there is no getting around the fact that the princess will never truly be at peace. What you see, this appearance of rest, is just a facade. She gives herself over to sleep, but she does so with a restless mind, knowing that when she wakes she will have to get up and continue to carry the burden of her responsibility. There is no respite. There is no moment where she can simply be, without having to worry about what others think or what the future demands of her. The silence of the castle seems to deepen even further. The outside noises disappear, and the atmosphere inside the princess's room is immersed in a disconcerting stillness. But you know that this is not true rest. There is no break in this cycle of obligations, and the princess can never escape it. The weight of your position doesn't allow you to breathe easily, doesn't allow you to be free. You look at her face, now peaceful, but without true serenity. Sleep, which seems to be the only possible escape, never comes completely. There is always a weight, a tension, that keeps her eyes slightly open, her mind slightly alert. The stillness of the night brings no relief, only another layer of solitude. The princess cannot relax, cannot lose herself in the small pleasures of everyday life. Her life does not allow her this simplicity. She is forced to always be more than an ordinary human being. Yet you see in the softness of her face the attempt to escape this constant pressure. Perhaps at some point she found some comfort, some kind of relief. But for now it is impossible for her. The weight of her own greatness is an invisible burden that accompanies her even in moments of rest. Even as she tries to surrender to sleep, this pressure never leaves. You begin to ponder the meaning of it all. The princess, surrounded by wealth, luxury, and power, is still trapped in her position. The castle, which should be a refuge, is merely a prison in disguise. Every wall seems to close in. Every curtain carries the weight of a future that can never be postponed. And even when night falls, she cannot escape it. Her life is not her own. She is constantly living for the eyes of others, for the eyes of the court, for the eyes of the world. Rest is no longer a privilege. It is a constant struggle for relief, and so the princess remains, in her room surrounded by luxury and silence, but always tied to the weight of royalty. And you, watching in silence, know that there is no true rest for her, not as long as her life continues to be marked by expectations that can never be fully met. The night progresses, and time, which seems to drag on endlessly in the silent corridors of the castle, now seems to be an ally of the princess. Although silence has settled in the room, there is a sense of tension in the air, an invisible expectation that makes each breath heavy and loaded with meaning. The princess, now asleep in her soft bed, seems to have finally reached what could be the beginning of a rest, but the sleep is not deep. It is light, like a thin veil, which floats over her. Consciousness without ever allowing her to completely disconnect from reality. Even while her eyes remain closed, her mind never stops spinning. She breathes softly as if trying to fight an invisible current that pulls her back to wakefulness, back to awareness of her surroundings. The weight of the crown, the weight of responsibility, the weight of constant observation. And it is here in this fleeting moment between waking and sleeping that you begin to better understand what it means to live the life of a medieval princess. It is not a life of ease or pleasure. It is not a life of rest or tranquility. The crown is heavy, and its weight never leaves it alone. As you watch, the room seems to distort slightly as the princess struggles against the intrusion of thoughts that never leave her alone. Even in her most private moments, in her most genuine attempt to rest, she is confronted by these incessant dilemmas, these uncompromising worries that keep her tied to her role. You begin to think that perhaps, if she could open her eyes and escape this cycle, she might find herself in a place where true peace is possible. But, like a shadow that never strays, responsibility continues to follow her every step, even in her dreams. There is a subtle irony at work here. Even though the castle, with its high walls and thick wooden doors, seems like a place of safety, it is, in fact, a cage in disguise. The princess's every move is watched. Every word she says is analyzed. She is no longer a person. She is an idea, an image of perfection, and that image must be maintained at all costs. There are no moments of genuine relaxation, no intervals where she can simply be herself. No matter how hard she tries to indulge in sleep or rest, something always brings her back to the harsh reality of royalty. The gentle breezes blowing through the windows now seem to be a solace, a small comfort that tries to calm the atmosphere. But the princess, although physically relaxed, is not completely at peace. There is always something else going on, something else she must consider. Duty is relentless, and even in the fragile state of sleep, the weight of that duty never disappears. You realize that perhaps the greatest sacrifice the princess made in becoming a royal was not the loss of her privacy or freedom, but the loss of simplicity. The life she leads, surrounded by opulence and luxury, is not a simple life, and contrary to what many imagine, there is no lasting pleasure in material abundance. Not when you live with the constant pressure to be the perfect image, the ideal woman, the flawless leader. She tries to relax a little more, and you see her muscles loosening a little, as if she were giving in to deep fatigue. But the tranquility never comes completely. Even in her sleep, her mind still races, still finds itself drawn to the role she must play. You think with a slight sadness that perhaps she has forgotten what it would be like to live without this constant pressure. Perhaps she has forgotten what it would be like to live without the need to be something she is not, without the obligation to be perfect all the time. And that, you realize, is the true price of being a princess. The silence of the room, now interrupted only by the soft sound of the wind and the soft rustling of the curtains, reflects the stillness she seeks, but can never achieve. The hours pass slowly and the pressure does not dissipate. The castle, with all its splendor and majesty, seems even more oppressive. Every stone, every arch, every wall seems to bear witness to the princess's internal struggle, her attempt to escape reality, and her inevitable failure to do so. You notice, with a sense of helplessness, that the rest the princess seeks will never be true rest. She cannot escape the duties that await her, the stares that watch her, the expectations that are placed upon her. She cannot escape her role, no matter how hard she tries. Sleep, however brief, will never take her to a place of true peace. Even in her moments of fragility, she cannot be free. The castle continues to echo with the distant sound of activity taking place elsewhere in the kingdom. But inside that room, where the princess tries to rest, all is silent, oppressive, and filled with a tense calm. And you who observe her realize more than ever the true nature of her existence. She is, in essence, a prisoner of her own greatness. As the night wears on, the princess begins to drift into a deeper state of sleep, but not without a struggle. Her eyes close a little more, and you notice the tension in her face ease slightly. But even in this moment of apparent relief, the crown weighing her down never completely disappears. You see that she is not just a princess of flesh and blood. She is a symbol, an image that needs to be constantly maintained, preserved, protected. And this, more than anything, prevents her from being free, even in her own dreams. The room is now immersed in a greater stillness, but the air feels charged, as if something is about to happen. The princess, finally relaxed, nevertheless seems to be trapped in a sleep that is, in its essence, only a brief refuge. You sense somehow that true peace will never be attained by her. The peace that the princess seeks is not just a relief from physical fatigue, but a release from the immense weight of her responsibilities, from the endless expectations of her position. But as you know, this peace is something that she will never have. The luxury, comfort, and riches around her cannot give her true rest, the one that comes from within, the one that comes from freedom. Now, as the night wears on, you realize that the silence that once seemed oppressive now has something calming about it. The gentle wind that blows through the windows is almost like a whisper, as if the castle is trying to calm her tumultuous mind, to soften the harsh contours of her life. But even this gentle touch of nature cannot erase the marks left by the weight of her royalty. The princess, in her bed, seems to finally be consumed by sleep. But this, like everything else in her life, is never complete. You realize that, no matter how hard she tries, true freedom, the freedom to rest deeply without worrying about tomorrow, will never be hers. She will always have to rise the next day, ready to face the weight of her crown, the weight of her position, the weight of being watched by everyone. However, as the princess sleeps, you notice a slight change in the atmosphere of the room. The tension that once seemed to permeate the walls begins to slowly fade. Perhaps sleep is, in some way, a small escape valve, a brief respite that allows her, if only for a moment, to escape the turmoil. However, as you well know, this respite is temporary. The world around her never stops spinning, and her obligations never diminish. Even in the silence of the night, she is being watched, analyzed, judged. You then become lost in deep thought. The princess is more than a royal figure. She is a representation of all those who are forced to carry the weight of expectation. She is a reflection of all those people who, regardless of their station in life, cannot find peace because they are consumed by the obligations that are imposed upon them. No matter how grand the castle, how luxurious the sheets, true freedom is never achieved, and this reflection settles within you as you silently watch the princess sleep. It is as if you have glimpsed a bit of the hidden truth of her life. And while it is not a life of complete misery, it is not a life of complete peace either. The stillness in the room deepens, and you feel the rhythm of her breathing becoming softer, more regular. She is finally in a deep state of sleep. But deep down you know that this is not the kind of rest she really needs. You begin to realize that in the end, the real battles she faces are not visible to the world. They are within herself, in the demands that real life imposes. There is no escape. There is no real respite, and then time seems to stop for a moment. The castle, the princess, the moonlight streaming through the windows. Everything becomes part of a single, gentle movement, like a deep breath. But before you can truly relax, what you feel is the harsh truth. The princess will wake up again, and with the dawn, the cycle will begin again. She will rise, face the expectations, and continue to carry the weight of the crown. And you who watch her feel a small sense of helplessness, but also a slight admiration for the quiet strength she possesses, however much that strength may be a burden. Now, as the night slowly begins to give way to dawn, you feel the gentle warmth of dawn seeping into the castle walls. The princess sleeps, finally free from all eyes, but still trapped in her own greatness. And you, at the end of it all, wonder, will she ever find what she truly desires? Will true freedom ever be hers? Or will she, like all of us, forever be reaching for something that is beyond her reach? Beyond her reach.